The boardroom went dead quiet the moment my son slid a stack of contracts toward me, on the day I was meant to be honored for 30 years of service. Name's Harlan Creighton, 52, an internal controller who still notices the hum of fluorescent lights and the smell of stale coffee when I grip my old Mont Blanc pen. Ever had a moment when something small told you trouble was coming? The oak table had held every holiday meal I could remember, but that night it looked more like a desk at a bank than the heart of a family home. Reese pushed a thick stack of papers across its polished surface, his phone glowing in his other hand, and said, "Just sign here, Dad. It's routine." He didn't look up, not even when he set my old Mont Blanc pen between us. I hadn't used any other pen for 20 years. Not for contracts, not for birthday cards, not for anything that mattered. It used to feel warm and familiar in my hand, like an extension of my name. That night it felt different, colder, heavier, as if it had been waiting for this exact moment. The house groaned softly as the coastal breeze slipped through the shutters, a sound I usually found comforting. Tonight every creak sounded like a warning. The cicadas outside droned their constant chorus, rising and falling like a far-off siren. I glanced at Lydia, who was standing by the sideboard with her hands folded around a cup of chicory coffee gone cold. She bit her lip when she caught my eye, then looked back at Reese as if weighing something she'd never say aloud. I lifted the pen, tracing the cool barrel with my thumb. The pages smelled faintly of printer ink, still sharp as though they'd come straight from a corporate machine instead of our modest family office. Reese flicked his thumb across his phone, smiling at something on the screen, not at me. He said, "Paperwork keeps us modern, Dad. No one does things the old way anymore." His tone was casual, but it landed like a dismissal. Modern, old way. I wondered when I had become one of those phrases instead of just his father. I signed the first page, then paused. "What exactly is this for again?" I asked, my voice soft enough to pass for idle curiosity. Reese didn't bother lifting his eyes. "Just some updates for compliance. Routine, like I said." The pen scratched over the paper again, each stroke of my name sounding louder than the last. My chest tightened with something I couldn't name, so I let my thumb slide across my phone, under the table, capturing a quiet photo of each page as I signed. Old habits die hard. I had spent decades auditing files for other people, and I wasn't about to stop because the signature line had my own name on it. The dining room smelled like fried shrimp from earlier, the lingering scent mixing with the coffee Lydia had brewed and forgotten to drink. It clung to the air, heavy and stubborn, just like the tension between us. Reese stacked the signed pages neatly, finally pocketing his phone to glance at me with a fleeting grin. "See, easy, you didn't even have to leave your chair." His grin didn't reach his eyes. He slipped the documents into a leather folder and left the pen on the table as though I wouldn't notice he hadn't handed it back. The sound of his shoes on the old hardwood faded down the hall, leaving only the cicadas and the slow hum of the fridge. Lydia set her cup down, the soft click echoing too loudly in the stillness. "I'll clear up," she murmured, her voice frayed at the edges, and left the room without another word. The Mont Blanc lay where he'd placed it, its black barrel glinting under the low light. I picked it up, rolling it slowly in my hand, and felt the faintest vibration in my pocket. My phone. One new text from an unknown number. "Check the employee pension fund. It starts there." The letters glowed on the screen, stark and cold, as the house settled around me like a heavy exhale. I sat back in my chair, pen balanced across my palm, listening to the distant creak of the beams overhead and the hiss of cicadas beyond the shutters. The papers I just signed were already out of reach, folded neatly in Reese's folder. I wondered, staring at the faint reflection of the dining room light on the pen's barrel, if I had just given away something I couldn't take back. The air felt thicker, heavier, as I whispered to myself, "Routine, huh?" and watched the shutters sway gently, like the house was waiting for me to realize what I had just done. The smell of cornbread and pulled pork hung in the air, thick as the voices that filled the small restaurant near the docks. A month had passed since I'd signed those routine papers, and tonight the Creighton Company dinner was supposed to be about team morale. To everyone else it looked like a celebration. To me it felt more like a stage Reese had built for himself. He stood at the head of the long wooden table, sleeves rolled up, smiling wide, as he told a story about taking the business into a new era. The employees laughed on cue, their glasses raised like he was already the man of the hour. When he looked my way, his smile thinned, like he had to remind himself I was still in the room. The muted crackle of an old radio filtered through the chatter, a soft bluegrass tune weaving between the voices. It reminded me of company picnics from years ago when my father would dance with my mother under the same kind of tune. That warmth felt distant now, replaced by a knot in my stomach. Geraldine Poe, one of our longest-serving employees, leaned closer from her seat across the table. Her hands, still calloused from decades of shipping work, slid a folded statement toward me under the cover of a napkin. "Look at this when you can," she whispered, her voice as dry as the wood walls around us. "Pension statements don't add up. Thought you should know." I slipped the paper into my jacket pocket, nodding slightly so she'd know I heard. Reese didn't notice he was too busy laughing with two new department heads, talking about streamlining, as if the people who'd built this company were weights to be trimmed. Lydia sat beside me, her teacup trembling just slightly as she poured for me for the third time, eyes darting between Reese and me like she was watching a fault line crack open. I forced a small smile for her sake, though my chest was heavy. I waited until Reese launched into another story about winning over a client, his hand slicing the air like a salesman. I unfolded the statement under the table, glancing down at the faint glow from my phone as I used it to light the page. Whiteout streaked across the 401k balances in uneven patches, a clumsy job for someone trying to make numbers disappear. The corrections stood out like scars glaring under the dim glow of the table lamp. Geraldine's whisper cut through the clatter of silverware. They said those changes were accounting errors. But 3 people got notices, their balances were zeroed out for review. No one's talking about it out loud. Her jaw tightened as she looked away. I tucked the statement deeper into my jacket just as Reese raised his glass. "To future leadership," he said, his voice rich and confident. His gaze skimmed over everyone at the table except me, landing just long enough to make the exclusion deliberate. The room erupted in cheers and clinking glasses. I kept my own glass on the table. I lifted my coffee cup instead, but my hand betrayed me, trembling just enough that when I set it down, a hairline crack crept along its side. The faint pop it made was swallowed by the laughter, but I felt it a quiet echo of the pressure building inside me. I curled my fingers away, watching the crack glint under the lamplight, as if the cup itself had decided it couldn't take any more strain. My phone buzzed on the table, the vibration subtle beneath the wood. I angled it toward me, reading the alert under the cover of my napkin. "A major supplier contract has been voided due to unauthorized signatures." My chest tightened further, the weight of the words pressing down on me like the damp air seeping through the restaurant's old windows. I leaned toward Lydia, keeping my voice low. "Did you see Reese sign anything recently?" My words were almost a whisper, swallowed by the cheer, as Reese clinked glasses with another manager. Lydia didn't answer. Her fork hovered above her plate, frozen, and her eyes stayed locked on the cornbread in front of her, as though if she kept still enough she might vanish into the noise. I sat back, the radio's bluegrass melody flickering like a memory of better days, while the crack in my cup cooled against my palm, cold and sharp. The celebration roared around me, but all I could hear was the faint buzz of my phone and the creak of the old floorboards beneath our feet. The cafe looked more like a relic than a business, its paint faded to a dull gray, and its windows fogged from the ocean air. It had stood on the docks for as long as I'd worked for the company, a quiet place where sailors, dock workers, and men like me came to eat ribs that tasted like smoke and time. I pushed through the weather-worn door and was greeted by the low growl of a jukebox saxophone, some old jazz standard that rose and fell like the tide. The smell of smoked meat and salt water clung to the air, thick enough to taste. Solomon Rives sat at the back in a booth, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp, watching me approach. He had been my mentor when I first joined the company, a man who could balance a ledger and a room with equal ease. But he'd stepped away years ago after one too many arguments with the board. Now he looked weathered but not weakened, with a measured calm that made me feel steadier just by sitting down. My Mont Blanc pen was already on the table in front of him, glinting softly under the dim light. He tapped it once, twice, then leaned forward. "Don't let this pen write your own downfall," he murmured, his voice as dry as the cafe's old wood walls. I wrapped my fingers around the pen, feeling the familiar coolness of its barrel. "You think I'm in that deep?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Solomon gave a faint smile, not cruel, just knowing. "Reese didn't hand you papers because he thought you'd read them carefully. He handed them to you because he knew you wouldn't." His gaze shifted briefly to the two dock workers by the counter, murmuring to each other about another round of layoffs, their voices barely rising above the soft hum of the jukebox. "Things are moving fast, Harlan, faster than you're used to." The waitress dropped off a plate of ribs, the smoke rising like a warning signal. Solomon pushed a small USB across the table next to it, its silver surface gleaming against the dark wood. "Everything I backed up before I left," he said. "Audit reports, pension statements, draft contracts. Follow the pension withdrawals first. That's where the bleed starts." The USB was cold, almost metallic against my palm, heavier than its size should allow. I slipped it into my jacket pocket, the weight of it pressing into my chest, like a reminder that every step from here mattered. "Document everything," Solomon continued, leaning back, as the saxophone trailed into a softer refrain. "Before you confront Reese, before you even breathe near the board, you make sure you've got a trail so clean they can't twist it back on you. He's young, ambitious, and desperate. That's a dangerous mix." His tone was even, but there was something beneath it, a warning born of having seen this kind of ambition turn ugly before. "You've spent decades holding this company steady. Don't let him gamble it all because he thinks the rules don't apply." I nodded, feeling the rough grain of the tabletop beneath my fingertips, grounding myself. The room felt heavy, the humid air pressing down, as if the cafe itself had been listening. Outside, through the fogged windows, I could see gulls circling the water, their cries sharp and distant like a chorus, echoing the unease settling in my stomach. I wanted to tell Solomon I still saw the boy Reese used to be, the one who used to run across these docks with a fishing pole twice his size, laughing so loud the gulls would scatter. But the man Reese had become didn't laugh like that anymore, and the stakes weren't minnow buckets and tangled lines now. They were 6 figures, maybe 7, and my name on every page. When I finally slid the USB into my laptop that night, the room was silent except for the slow drip of the kitchen faucet. Lines of data scrolled past pension withdrawals, marked in red, each one larger than the last. Then the signatures appeared digital, but clearly Reese's name. Line after line, 6-figure amounts bled from accounts that should have been locked down for retirees who had given their lives to this company. My stomach tightened a slow, cold coil. The saxophone from the cafe still played faintly in my head when my phone buzzed on the table beside me. The screen lit up with an automated message, clinical and emotionless, "Final transfer, awaiting your authorization." The words glowed in the dark kitchen like a flare, bright and sharp, as I sat there with the USB still warm from my laptop and the Mont Blanc pen lying beside me, its black barrel catching the dim light. Outside, the gulls' cries carried through the night air, as if the docks themselves were warning me whatever I signed next could decide whether this company and everyone tied to it would survive. The office looked different after hours, as if the walls themselves were listening. The neon glow from the building's exterior sign seeped through the blinds, painting the oak-paneled hallway in a pale, watery blue. My footsteps on the polished floor felt too loud, echoing against the silence. Outside, rain tapped gently on the tall windows, the steady rhythm broken only by the distant crash of waves from the harbor. Inside, the hum of fluorescent lights made the space feel less like a workplace and more like a courtroom where the verdict had already been written. I slipped the USB deeper into my jacket pocket, feeling its cold edges press against my ribs, while my other hand tightened around the Mont Blanc pen. The familiar weight should have grounded me, but it felt alien tonight, like a relic that no longer belonged in my hand. I pushed open the heavy door to the records room, the hinges groaning as though warning me back. The scent of old wood and paper hit me in a wave. Oak cabinets lined the walls, each drawer locked, but I already knew where Reese kept the digital backups. He thought physical security was enough. He forgot I trained the man who installed the network here. The screen flickered to life as I slotted the USB into the company terminal. Rows of folders appeared, each labeled with sterile precision. It didn't take long to find the file. I feared most a scanned contract titled Creighton Transfer, Draft Final. My name sat neatly on the signature line written in Mont Blanc ink, the stroke weight unmistakable. But I had never signed this version. My jaw tightened as I scrolled through the pages, the legal jargon bending into something simple. Reese, with the help of an outside firm, had arranged for controlling shares of Creighton Maritime to pass through a holding company, his holding company. I gripped the pen in my hand so tightly, I heard a faint crack. The barrel gave slightly under the pressure, the subtle pop, loud in the still room. I looked down at it at the tiny fracture along its side and felt my breath slow to a deliberate calm. From the hallway speakers, Reese's voice carried faintly a recorded message left on a voicemail for one of his partners. By next quarter, he's out. Reese said, his tone light, almost gleeful. He'll sign what he needs to, and by the time he realizes the handover will be done, will be liquid by fall. I minimized the contract and opened the folder Solomon had warned me about. Pension fund withdrawals lit up the screen in sharp red highlighted entries. Line after line, dates spanning nearly a year, each one a six-figure sum. Over 70% of the employee pension fund had been siphoned into accounts under shell corporations Reese controlled. I leaned closer, the screen's cold light washing my face. As the rain outside intensified, each drop ticking like a clock, I was running out of time to beat. These weren't mistakes. They were calculated extractions dressed up as temporary reallocations in the ledger notes. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as my phone buzzed on the desk. A video call from Reese. My reflection in the screen looked older than I felt, the cracks in the pen still visible where it rested beside the keyboard. I swiped to answer the neon from the window, cutting across my face. Reese filled the screen, his smile sharp and easy. Burning the midnight oil, Dad. That's new for you. He leaned back in his chair, somewhere brightly lit, a drink sweating on the desk behind him. One signature away. That's all it takes. You can't stop progress no matter how nostalgic you get for the old ways. I didn't speak. I let the silence stretch, only the faint sound of rain and the low hum of the lights between us. His smile faltered just for a second before he shook his head with a chuckle. You'll see, it's better this way. You get to step back, enjoy your coffee and your radio shows, and let me handle the future. When the call ended, the screen went black, reflecting the faint glow of the cracked Mont Blanc pen on the desk. I reached out and turned the pen slowly between my fingers, feeling the jagged edge where the fracture had formed. The rain outside slowed to a soft patter, each drop hitting the glass with a quiet finality. I closed my laptop, the echo of the latch clicking shut louder than it should have been in the empty office. My whisper barely rose above the sound of the fluorescent hum, but the words felt solid in my chest. This isn't over. Reese's voice carried through the heavy air like a salesman pitching a brighter tomorrow. The boardroom, with its polished wood walls and thick curtains drawn against the Charleston summer glare, felt more like a stage than a place of decisions. He stood at the head of the long table in a navy suit, cut sharp enough to draw eyes, his tone smooth, his gestures wide. Modernizing leadership, he was saying, like the words themselves were currency, ensures Creighton. Maritime thrives in a new era. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked louder than usual, each second dragging. The scent of lemon polish clung to the walls, sweet but suffocating, like someone had tried to scrub away years of dust and history, all at once. The board members, 5 in total, shifted in their seats, some nodding, others studying the papers in front of them with tightened jaws. Lydia sat near the end, her hands folded, her eyes flicking between me and Reese. Geraldine stood just inside the doorway, hands clasped, jaw set tight. I walked in with Solomon at my side. The cracked Mont Blanc pen gripped loosely in my right hand. Conversation stilled, Reese's pitch faltering for just a breath before he smoothed his expression. Dad, he said, his voice dipped in cordiality. You didn't have to come down. We were just finishing. I know, I cut in quietly, setting the pen on the table with a deliberate click. But I think they need to hear everything before you finish. Solomon moved to the corner near the projector, sliding a small USB into the port. The screen on the far wall flickered to life, rows of numbers and graphs populating the display. I took a breath, steadying my voice. as I pointed to the highlighted transactions. These are pension withdrawals from the past 12 months. Over 70% of employee retirement funds redirected to shell companies tied to this name. I tapped Reese's signature on the screen digital, but clear the red highlighted entries standing out like wounds. The board shifted, uncomfortably, murmurs rising. Reese laughed lightly, spreading his hands. This is innovation, temporary reallocations, strategic investments. These people will thank us when the returns come through. His eyes darted from one face to the next, searching for agreement. He didn't find it. I reached into my folder and pulled out the printed contracts, the ones Solomon had flagged. And these, I said, laying them on the table, are transfer agreements for controlling shares. Notice the ink. Mont Blanc black, same as this pen. I lifted the cracked barrel, the fracture catching the light. I've used this pen for 2 decades and I never signed these versions. But Reese did. He thought the pen would make it convincing. The murmurs turned to low voices of dissent. One board member, a man who had been with us since the 90s, frowned deeply at Reese. You forged documents with your father's instrument. You drained the pension fund. This isn't strategy, it's fraud. The word hung in the air, heavier than the smell of polish sticking like humidity. Reese's confident facade wavered, his smile straining. You're clinging to outdated ideas, all of you. I'm building something sustainable. You can't grow a company by babysitting obsolete funds and old men who won't let go. I met his eyes calm. This company grew because people trusted it. You don't burn the foundation to build a higher tower. Not if you want anyone left standing beneath it. I gestured toward Solomon, who was quietly typing into his phone as the projector displayed the last of the withdrawals and forged contracts. Send it, I told him, my voice even. To the federal auditors, all of it. Solomon nodded once, pressing the final command. The screen dimmed, replaced by the Creighton logo, hollow now, in the tension-filled room. The grandfather clock chimed the half-hour, its tone cutting through the silence. Reese's face reddened as he slammed his fist against the polished table, the sharp crack making Lydia flinch. You're destroying the family name, not me, he shouted, his voice raw desperation creeping through the polish. His eyes darted between the board members, looking for someone to speak to back him, but no one moved. I didn't answer him. I simply placed the cracked Mont Blanc pen back into my breast pocket and stepped toward the window, pulling the curtain just enough to let a sliver of humid light seep in. The smell of lemon polish still hung heavy, but now it was mixed with something sharper, fear, and the faint electricity of a shift Reese couldn't control. Behind me, the room stayed silent, the only sound the relentless ticking of the grandfather clock. Each tick felt like another second, closing the gap between what Reese had done and what was coming next. The boardroom door slammed behind Reese with a force that made the curtains tremble. Through the window, I could see him shove the glass door open and step into the rain, his voice carrying back in muffled bursts of anger. I followed the humid air clinging to my skin as I stepped outside into the Charleston downpour. The rain soaked through my jacket in seconds, the cobblestones slick underfoot, the streetlights casting halos on the puddled ground. Above it all, faint and deliberate, the bell of St. Philip's tolled its somber notes, drifting across the old district, like the sound of a verdict being read. Reese spun to face me under the pale glow of a flickering lamp, his suit plastered to his frame hair, dripping into his eyes. You think this is over, he shouted, his voice breaking in places. You've just signed the death warrant for this company, for yourself. I'll take you to court, drag every skeleton out, make sure Creighton Maritime is rubble by the time I'm done. His fists were clenched, but there was a tremor in his posture, not from the cold, but from something deeper, the kind of desperation that comes when a plan unravels faster than you can stitch it back. The rainwater ran cold down the back of my collar as I took a steady step closer, clutching the cracked Mont Blanc pen in my pocket like a touchstone. My voice came out low, even though the rain nearly swallowed it. If the company burns, it won't be because of me, Reese. You know that. You built this fire yourself. Behind me, the door opened again. Geraldine stepped out, umbrella forgotten at her side, her gray hair plastered to her cheeks, followed by 3 other employees still in their damp work clothes. They didn't speak at first, just stood behind me, the quiet weight of their presence filling the gap Reese's shouting left. Then Geraldine held out a folder, her fingers stiff from the cold. Petition, she said simply. Every department signed. We want you in charge, Harlan. Whatever it takes. Reese let out a bitter laugh, though it wavered. A piece of paper with a few signatures. That's supposed to stop the courts, the IRS. You don't even know what's coming, old man. His voice caught slightly on the last words, the insult sounding less like confidence and more like someone trying to convince himself he still held the upper hand. The board members had filtered out onto the steps, now their silhouettes blurred by the rain. One of them, a man who had backed Reese during the meeting, cleared his throat. "We'll cooperate with the auditors," he said, raising his voice over the storm. "It's the only way to limit the damage. The federal inquiry isn't optional anymore." His gaze flicked to Reese, who turned away sharply, jaw tightening. For a moment, all I could hear was the rain and the steady, deliberate tolling of St. Philip's. It struck me how many endings that sound had marked in the city. Over the years, funerals, closures, storms, rolling in from the Atlantic. Tonight it was tolling for something else. The end of whatever version of Reese thought he could remake the family legacy by tearing it apart. I reached into my coat fingers, closing around the cracked Mont Blanc. The weight of it was different now, heavier somehow, as if carrying not just ink, but every choice and signature that had brought us to this night. I let it drop into my pocket. The faint thunk swallowed by the rain. "This fight isn't about me anymore," I said mostly to myself. Though Geraldine's slight nod told me she heard it. It wasn't just about keeping a company alive. It was about making sure the people who had given it their years wouldn't see their futures siphoned away. Reese turned once more, his face shadowed by the streetlight, and jabbed a finger toward me. "You're going to regret this," he said, softer now, the fury giving way to something closer to pleading. "When the courts are done, when the IRS drags your name through the mud, you'll wish you just signed and walked away." My phone buzzed in my coat pocket before I could answer the vibration sharp against the fabric. I pulled it out, the screen glowing pale blue against the wet night. A new email subject line, stark and to the point, mandatory meeting regarding pension transfers. Internal Revenue Service. The timestamp marked it as immediate, non-negotiable. The rain hissed around us, the bell's last toll echoing through the street as I locked the screen and slid the phone back into my pocket. Reese was already walking away, his figure dissolving into the rain-soaked shadows. The employees stayed behind me, silent, the faint shuffle of their shoes on wet stone, the only sound as the storm finally began to ease. A year can feel like a lifetime when everything you've built has cracked apart. I sat on a weathered bench by the Charleston docks, the wood rough against my palms, as dusk laid a soft purple glow over the harbor. From a cafe just down the pier, the slow murmur of a jazz saxophone floated through the humid air, threading between the faint creak of boats moored in their slips. The scent of salt and seaweed was steady, but not sharp anymore, like the air itself had softened after the storm that had nearly sunk us all. Solomon Reeves eased onto the bench beside me, his shoulders carrying the same calm weight they had the day I first asked him for help. He set a small box on my lap with a faint smile tugging at one corner of his mouth. "Thought this might feel different now," he said, his voice low enough that it blended with the jazz. Inside, cushioned in dark felt, lay my Mont Blanc pen whole again, its fracture gone. A subtle engraving ran along the barrel now, for renewal and trust. The words were so faint, I had to tilt it toward the cafe's light to see them. I turned it slowly in my fingers, the cool surface no longer carrying the tension it once did. Lydia stepped up from behind us, resting a warm hand on my shoulder as she took a seat. She didn't speak, just let her thumb trace the edge of my jacket sleeve, while the gulls circled overhead, their calls softer than the ones I'd heard a year ago, on a night when everything felt like it was breaking. Her presence steadied me more than the pen ever could. Solomon nodded toward the small stack of documents on the bench beside me. "Sign those and it's official. The sale goes through tomorrow. Part of the company's liquidated, but every cent's already earmarked pension recovery. Community training center, a cushion for the people who stuck through the worst of it." He tapped the papers once, then leaned back, the faint glow from the cafe catching the edge of his glasses. "It won't erase what Reese did, but it's a start." I picked up the first page, the ink of the header glinting faintly in the fading light. Geraldine approached as I uncapped the pen. Her hair pulled back, her raincoat still speckled from an earlier drizzle. She handed me a small bundle of envelopes, each one marked in the handwriting of different employees. "Thank you letters," she said softly. "Some of them couldn't be here tonight, but they wanted you to know what this means. A few nearly lost their homes waiting for those pensions to come back." Her voice tightened, but she smiled faintly. "They said they trust you, said they trust us." The cafe's saxophone eased into a gentler refrain as I pressed the Mont Blanc's tip to the paper. The ink flowed smoothly, the pen gliding like it had never been broken. On the top page beneath the printed text, I wrote Creighton Community Fund 2023. The words looked steadier than my hand felt. When I capped the pen and set it down, Solomon gave a small nod, almost like a silent toast. The gulls dipped low over the water, their wings catching the last glint of sunset as the tide shifted. I leaned back, feeling Lydia's hand rest against my shoulder again, and let the humid air settle around us. Solomon glanced out at the cafe, its windows glowing soft gold, and said in his slow, deliberate way, "Reese might come around. Or not. But you're not waiting anymore." The jazz hummed in the background, the salt air cool on my face, and I looked out over the harbor, the repaired pen steady in my palm. For the first time in years, the horizon didn't feel like something closing in. It felt like something opening. The sunlight streaming through the tall windows painted the floor of the renovated mill in soft gold, warming the wood beneath my shoes as I stood at the front of the Creighton Community Center. Outside, gulls called faintly over the harbor, but inside, the air buzzed with quiet anticipation. A low murmur of voices, employees, their families, neighbors filled the hall, mingling with the scent of freshly brewed coffee and the faint tang of wood polish. Near the entrance, a case caught the light, my Mont Blanc pen resting on a velvet-lined cradle behind glass. Its engraved words glinting softly. Children's laughter drifted in from the open courtyard, their voices weaving through the calm hum of the room. The tension that had once hung over every gathering like a storm cloud was gone, replaced by something warmer, steadier. Lydia moved easily among the small clusters of staff, her smile soft, her laugh unforced. I caught her eye and she tilted her head toward the back where Solomon stood, hands in his pockets, watching with the quiet approval of someone who'd seen more battles end than begin. I stepped up to the podium, feeling the faint warmth of the sunlight on my shoulders, and let my eyes sweep across the crowd. Geraldine was near the front, her posture straight, eyes bright. Behind her, a few of the younger employees leaned in toward each other, whispering not with suspicion, but with the easy energy of people looking forward rather than back. I cleared my throat, the sound small, but enough to still the room. This building used to be a mill. I began, my voice carrying more steadily than I expected. It made rope and netting for half this harbor before it went quiet. Today it opens again, not as a factory, but as a place to hold things together in a different way. My eyes swept to Geraldine, then to the families, the children chasing one another just beyond the doorway. This center isn't just ours. It belongs to everyone who gave their time and trust to a company that almost failed them. It's our way of making sure that trust doesn't go to waste. The applause rose gently like a tide, and I motioned for Geraldine to join me. She walked up her steps, measured but certain, and I opened the display case with a small brass key. The pen gleamed softly in the sunlight, the engraving catching the light as I lifted it. "This pen has signed a lot of things over the years," I said, offering it to her. "Some I wish I could take back, some I'd signed twice. But it's here now, not as a tool for one man, but as a reminder for all of us. Every signature from here on matters." Geraldine's hand trembled just slightly as she placed the pen back into the case, closing the glass door with a soft click. From the corner of my eye, I caught a figure near the back of the hall. Reese standing still, his hands in his pockets, watching but not meeting anyone's gaze. No one else seemed to notice him. Their eyes were on the pen, on the speeches, on the center itself. He lingered for a moment, his face unreadable, before turning quietly and slipping through the side exit. The door closed softly behind him, the sound barely audible over the applause. The crowd's clapping swelled as I stepped back from the podium, the sunlight bright on the polished floor, the scent of coffee and fresh wood rising with the sound. I turned toward the tall windows that framed the view of the harbor, the water shimmering in the afternoon light. For a moment, the noise behind me softened the laughter of the children outside, mixing with the faint cry of a gull over the water. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding and whispered low enough that only I could hear. At least now the signatures mean something. The words hung there for a beat, carried lightly on the warm air, as I watched the tide roll in and the horizon stretch out wide and open no longer a line I was afraid to cross. The evening sun dipped low, casting a soft amber glow through the tall windows, as the repaired pen glinted quietly behind its glass case. For the first time in years, I felt lighter, as if the tide that once pulled everything apart had finally receded. Life, I've learned, isn't about holding every bridge intact. Sometimes one has to fall so we can see which ones deserve to be rebuilt. Justice can feel cold, but when paired with a little grace, it can also make room for hope to grow again. If you've ever faced a loss or betrayal and found your own second wind, I'd love to hear how you found your footing. Share your story below or tell me how life handed you a second chance.